Hey, and welcome or welcome back to the Starting Over podcast, the podcast that is designed to help, guide, inspire, motivate you on your healing journey. Now, it's often those times where we encounter a difficulty in life and we wake up to the ways in which we have been living, whether that be in a work environment and we're in a job or a career that we chose because our parents told us we should, or because society tells us that we should. Maybe you're in a relationship that has gone awry and makes you call everything into question, or some other challenge. They're the kind of stories that we discuss on this podcast, and we have a really inspiring one of those for you today with an Australian leadership coach, Jo Wagstaff. Now, Jo, in a previous life, meaning earlier on in her career, she was 30 years old and she was sitting at the executive table of Australia's leading wealth management organisation. She was responsible for a team of over 150 people and a $40 million budget. Her life was what so many of us would call successful. And she says, I loved my job, I loved my career, but there was a huge cost to it. She was burnt out climbing the corporate ladder. Her marriage ended. Her father passed away. She didn't feel like she was a good enough mother to her young son. And then one day she stopped and she embarked on a deep transformational journey. And that is some of the journey that we discuss today. And really the goal here for you, the inspirational point for you, is to pause and to consider your own definition of success. And are you currently living the life that you want to be living? And what are the small little things that you can do to make it better? We talk about fear, happiness, our nervous system. We talk about questions that we must regularly ask ourselves. We talk about self-care, and not in the form of lavender bubble baths or hikes in the mountains, but in the form of doing your taxes and your life admin properly, because that stuff matters too. Now, if you haven't done so already, please do click pause wherever you are listening to this and leave a quick rating or a review. It makes a world of difference to the growth of this podcast, and I would be extremely grateful for it. But with no further ado, here is my conversation with Jo. Jo, thank you so much for joining us for another episode of the Starting Over podcast. It is such a pleasure to have you, and I think you are somebody who epitomizes what it means to start over and to courageously transform your life and define your own definition of success. So thank you so much for being here.
Oh, thank you for the invitation. I'm really looking forward to the conversation.
So where I want to start, Jo, is really with your own starting over. So I want to go back to the time where you were in this super quote unquote successful corporate position in the financial services industry. And you recall a time where you were at a party and on paper, it would have been like jackpot, this is it. But you said you looked at yourself in the mirror and had the saddest, loneliest eyes looking back at you. Walk us through that night.
Yeah. God, it's hard. It's still hard to remember that night, as in to just remember that feeling of emptiness that I became aware of. And as you said, on paper and in real life, actually, it looked like I should have been the happiest woman alive. I had turned up it was an executive function at James Packer's apartment in Bondi Beach, and James Packer's kind of one of the wealthiest families here in Australia. And I was the only female amongst a bunch of male executives. And I thought I had arrived. I'd made it. You know, I was 32 years of age. I was married to a handsome investment banker who used to be a vet. I had a 14-month-old son. I flew at the front end of the plane. I had all the material things I thought I needed to be happy. And I so vividly remember that walk into the powder room and, you know, going to check my lipstick like I normally would. But really that part of me that noticed for the first time that looking back at me was, as I said, an emptiness, a sadness and an emptiness that I just didn't understand at the time. It was very unconscious at that time. But actually, that was the beginning of my life spiraling out of control. And I have no doubt that on an unconscious level, I played a really big part in that recognition that I was not fulfilled and the recognition that something was amiss. And that something, as I found out a number of years later, was my relationship with myself and the sense of kind of who I was. I was living, I don't know if I was living a lie, but I was absolutely not living consciously connected to who I wanted to be in the world. And as I said, my life began to spiral out of control from that point on. My marriage ended. My father died of cancer, got sick and died of cancer in a really short period of time. I had a complex relationship with him, so I was filled with what I would call complex grief in that process. And I found the most dysfunctional relationship I could to really run away from myself. And I think from a place of deep unworthiness as well, with a young guy who was incredibly good looking, was a wannabe actor, but had never acted, I don't think, a day in his life, who later I learnt was a drug addict, alcoholic, gambler, the list kind of goes on. And that was a whole new world to me. Like, I had been a very proper, quite highly strung, I suppose, very ambitious and career orientated, cared a lot about what people thought about me. And so he kind of introduced me to a whole new world that I did not know existed before I learned that it existed.
That wasn't the drug world, was it?
Oh yeah, some of it was. Some of it was. It was what I would call high end party scene. And I had never taken a drug in my life when I first got introduced to that scene, and all of a sudden I was trying kind of almost every drug there was, and as I say in the books, I'm snorting cocaine off toilet seats on the evenings that I didn't have my son. Like, so, and again, it was so polar opposite to who I was outside of that and who I had always been. But I really understand now I was running away from myself. Yeah, I didn't know how to process the grief. And as many of us here would know now, when the grief of the present comes to us through whatever happens in our life in the present, the grief of the past comes as well. And so there was a lot of unresolved grief for me. Yeah.
Yeah. It's interesting, isn't it, how so many of us spend our whole lives trying to run away from ourselves, and we can't, because we're the person with whom we have to spend all of our time. So it's definitely worth working on our relationship with ourselves.
Yeah. I mean, I believe it's kind of that's the foundation of the rest of our life is built on the relationship we create with ourselves.
Absolutely. So what was the shift in direction for you? Was there a defining moment or a wake-up call when you said, okay, enough is enough and I need to find a new way, where you shifted into the work that you're doing now, which is dramatically different from financial services and the industry you were in before?
Yeah, it was a combination of things. As part of this kind of falling apart, I suppose, breaking down, I did walk away from my corporate career. I just, again, I was offered a redundancy at the time, an enormous sum of money actually, because for a whole lot of reasons, I had equity in the business that I was in. And it felt like a really good opportunity to do sort of early retirement. And so I walked away thinking, oh, I'm not sure what I want to do with my career now. But I think the 2 or 3 things that then happened is there was a share market crash, and the rest of the money that was coming to me didn't vest. And so, I had looked to money for my security, for my sense of control, my whole life, actually. It was a lot of what drove my ambition. And again, unknowingly, unconsciously. And so when that kind of rug, and I was by no means desolate, but when that rug got pulled out from under me, I was like, whoa, that kind of again sent me on another kind of spiral. And I think the thing that really changed, or the major transition point for me, is I remember one day waking up. This guy had been out all night. He had knocked on the door at 6:00 in the morning. He came in. And for a change, my son was home. So my son is now about 2.5, 3 years of age at that stage. And I remember going, oh my God, what am I doing? What am I doing as a mother, allowing this man into our lives, even though he wasn't usually there when my son was there? And I actually picked Hugo up. I drove over to my mum's place. I said, I need you to look after Hugo. I drove back. I filled up everything in the apartment that belonged to this man into garbage bags. I put them outside the apartment. I woke him up and I said, leave, you need to leave. Now I can't keep doing this to myself. The behaviour I put up with, the level of self-abandonment was extraordinary. Like I look back now and I think, who was that woman that allowed the behaviour, or allowed myself to think that was kind of any form of love. But the big thing for me was I did not like who I was as a mother, and that was not who I was going to be as a mother. And so the way I changed my life to be a better mother, that was the beginning. That was the beginning impetus, I suppose. And I took myself off to a health retreat, walked around this labyrinth that was in the grounds of this health retreat in the middle of the night. It just happened to be a full moon when I was there. I wasn't particularly spiritual at the time, but I was desperate at the time. So I walked around this labyrinth. I got to the top of the hill. I got down on my knees and I prayed to the moon. And, what a blessing, because the moon is the ultimate feminine symbol. And what I recognized is I had lost connection with anything feminine inside of me at that point, because it didn't feel very safe. My feminine didn't feel very safe in me. And that was,
and you'd also been in a very male-dominated environment.
Oh, super male-dominated environment.
Like up until that point. So highly masculine.
Yeah.
A lot about the achievement, leadership, action, gutso.
Money, intellect, male intellect. Always pedestalizing the male intellect and not acknowledging my own within that. Turning up to conferences where there would be 50 to 100 men in suits and I was the only female in the room. Yeah, it was, not surprisingly, it was like, how do I fit into this world? Who do I need to be safe and to get on and succeed in this world? Yeah. So I became very masculine in how I dealt with life.
Yeah. It is interesting on reflection in that we all, whether we are aware of it or not, go about our lives trying to feel safe. And how we have experienced our childhood will usually lead to vastly different ways in which we do that. Do you seek achievement, money, status, wealth because you're fearing so desperately the judgment of other people? Are you seeking safety and security in somebody to lead you, to guide you, to help you because you're not trusting that you have what is within you to do it on your own? There are so many different ways.
Yeah.
What was it for you, though, in particular?
At the core for me, I think it has always been about money and achievement as a form of control, because then I don't have to rely on anyone else. But of course, in that process, I am relying on many people. Yeah. So it's very convoluted.
Yeah. So you said one of the things that you woke up to on this healing journey as such was actually in relation to your relationship with your mother. And you said she had worked so hard and became very externally successful, but she also had many of her own insecurities and patterns from her upbringing, which then became your own.
Mm.
So fascinating. I think we joke about this colloquially, whether anyone is interested in this healing journey or not. I presume anyone who's listening to this podcast, of course, has been doing some of this work.
Yeah.
But that we always say, oh, you're going to turn out like your bloody mother. Or what are the in-laws? Like, let's look to the parents to see what the future holds, And in many ways, it's so true. It's so true. And that is also the beauty, though, in doing this work, because at some point you wake up and you realize, oh, wow, okay, if I don't shift something, I am going to repeat the same patterns, that the default thinking that has been laid down based on what I experienced. Do you want that or not? Do
Yeah.
you want to make a change or not?
Yeah.
And that's often the point where we have to be really intentional, because it requires sustained effort. It's not as simple as going, oh, okay, I understand that my mum worked very hard and prized achievement, and therefore I did too, Jo. It's like, no, you need to probably make that repeated commitment to yourself to go a little bit easier on yourself, to be more gentle, to be more kind, more loving.
Yeah. Yeah, it's such a knot to untangle, isn't it? Like, and as you say, I think
yes.
I've repeated a number of these patterns over and over again, and just become more conscious each time of the pattern that I am in. Both the patterns that were laid down and what I saw in my mum in terms of the relationships that she had, and certainly the work ethic, and all the beliefs and assumptions that I then took on as my own, and the values that I took on as my own, which she had taken on from her parents. And I talk about my grandparents in the book as well, in terms of, all they were interested in was what was Mr. Jones's job, and what car did Mrs. Jones drive, and what job did the young son get. And so all I ever heard was about what everybody was doing and achieving in the world. And so how could I not then think that that's where my value came from? How could I not think that's how I proved my worth in the world? Because that's kind of what I was hearing. Whether they meant it or not didn't even matter. That's what I was hearing, and that's what I took on as my narrative in life. So to change our narrative, especially the ones that have been handed down from generation to generation, that's a big work for a mama to do, for anyone to do.
It is. Got to praise the courage for anyone who bravely does that. That is for sure.
Yeah.
So, what, Jo, now for you? How would you define success? Because I imagine there's been a big shift for you.
Yeah, there's been a massive shift. I was very externalized around my picture of success. So I remember when I walked away from my big corporate job, and I no longer had the business card with the important title on it, the expense account, the big brand that I worked for. So when I went to a dinner party and someone said, "Oh, what do you do?" Well, I'm the executive general manager of marketing for Challenger Financial Services. That was all so wrapped up in my identity. And I'm not joking when I say I kind of felt like I'd lost my right limb when that happened. Like a part of me had disappeared, and I didn't know how to be without that part of me. So it was a big step to kind of walk away from that version of success. But I think what was even more interesting is when I then decided to go back into the world. I was like, okay, I because of what happened in the share market, because I'd lost all this money, I do need to work again. And what am I going to do? I had this constant inner battle between what I thought was important, and that meaning what I thought that the rest of the world would think was important, versus what I felt was important, what was going to be of value to me. And then thrown into that, at the time I was a single mum with still a young child, and how do I make some money? Like, how do I look after myself within that? So there's a lot of different triggers and pieces in that to try to understand, and, as you so beautifully said a moment ago, try to learn. And the biggest shift in my healing was when I learned self-compassion, which I still learn every day. It's still the thing that I struggle with the most, It's not how I grew up in my head. Self-compassion was not how I motivated myself, that's for sure. Whereas now now it is a practice. So it was quite a journey for me to decide, could I really not go back into the corporate world? Could I really start a business that played to what really were my innate strengths around my relationship skills? Because in the financial services world, I hadn't valued those at all, albeit I think that's what others valued in me, but I didn't see that because I just compared myself to the intellect that I saw. And I had always thought I was stupid, sadly, because my father had a habit when he got really angry and upset to say, "What do you think, you're stupid?" And I had taken that on. I had made that a belief in myself. But I am far from stupid. And it's been nice to learn that slowly, but that took me a long time to learn. And so even when I first started my business working, my kind of executive coaching and leadership business, I joined another group that did this work, but they did it more from a business strategy perspective. And I was like, yeah, okay, I'll do business strategy. And because that was sort of more serious and more important and more, people would think, that I was more intelligent or something. Always this trying to be someone, trying to prove something. And
Yes.
But in the end, my values weren't aligned with that organisation. And they were very good at what they did, but that was not who I was and what I wanted to do and what I wanted to bring. So it's been a constant coming home to who I am, what I bring, how I bring it. And yeah, that's what I value now in terms of success. Success for me now is a deeply fulfilling career and one that is very balanced with the other parts of my life that are very important to me.
And let me ask you this, because you raised such an important point about values and authenticity. Are you experiencing more joy in what you're doing now because you are in greater alignment with your core values and how you actually want to be, when you remove the societal expectations, when you remove the narrative or the story that you've been told by your parents or other significant people in your life? Are you happier?
Yeah, unquestionably. I hesitated for a moment because writing this book has been an excruciating process and has brought back up every little corner that I did not know had been left unturned in my unhealed in my journey. So right now, and I'm still processing that. So right now, my inner world is pretty tough, pretty raw, and the fact that I've got the capacity to hold that level of rawness and trauma that I've needed to work through as part of this process and still show up so fully in my life, that is one thing I'm incredibly proud of, and I know would never have been able to happen without the healing work that I had done. And to answer your question around joy and happiness, when I'm not in my rawness at the moment, absolute joy at the simplest things, at connection with myself, connection with the ocean, connection with my girlfriends, connection with my son, connection with myself, even when it's raw and painful. And perhaps even better, although is there anything better than joy? But joy and happiness come and go. I think what is the feeling that I have learned to cultivate, which I never even wanted to cultivate prior to this process, this healing, is satisfaction. I can feel satisfied with who I am, like I'm enough, my life is enough, what I've done already in my world is enough. I don't have to save the world anymore. I don't have to save myself anymore. Not every day, some days I still do. But more and more and more, I can feel deeply satisfied and nourished just with life on a daily basis.
Oh, that speaks to me. That speaks to so many people, I'm sure, because I think when people pause and ask themselves, am I satisfied? Am I satisfied with myself? It can probably be quite a confronting question. And at the same time, a beautiful opportunity to look at the parts of why you're not, in fact.
Yeah.
Like what is it? What is it that's missing in terms of that satisfaction? Is it that you know you should be doing something else than what you're doing, and you haven't had the courage, let's say, to make that transition or that change, so you're limiting yourself, and of course then that's bringing you dissatisfaction. Or it could be a whole variety of things. But yeah, that's a great point about the feeling of satisfaction.
And I remember when
Yeah.
I was younger, again, before this whole journey, I, I, I didn't aspire to feel satisfied. I thought, how boring. Like, who wants to be satisfied? I don't want to be content. I want to be excited, and I want to take on the world, and,
Yes.
and don't get me wrong, I'm super passionate and super tenacious still. My tenacity can completely run away with me at times still. But to be able to hold both, to be able to be deeply satisfied and know I am enough, my life as it is enough, my relationships are enough, and still have dreams and visions and aspirations. There's a magic that happens when we can hold both.
Quick pause. If you're a regular listener to the show and you have found value in these episodes, I would be immensely grateful if you pledged your support. Reality is, podcasting is not a free venture. There are many behind the scenes costs. But with your support, you'll be able to help me fuel the growth of this podcast and keep bringing you bigger and better guests each and every week. And of course, the signature honesty and real talk, which I'm known for. So if you'd like to say thanks and support the show for less than a cup of coffee per week, you can click the link called Patreon in the show notes. Thanks so much in advance, guys. Back to the episode. So you talk about 3 pillars in your book: knowing yourself, caring for yourself, and being yourself. Walk us through an overview of what these 3 pillars are and why they're so important.
Really, the one that has taken me years to understand and, on some degree, to the best of my ability, embody is the first one. And I don't think we can do the other 2 without firstly knowing ourselves. And
Knowing yourself.
yeah. And because, when I started from that story at the very beginning, I didn't know who I was then. I didn't know what was running me. I didn't know why I was miserable. I didn't know why I was happy when I was happy. I really didn't understand my inner world. And I absolutely did not understand the impact my history had on me. And I don't mean that from a point of view of blame at all anymore, although I've gone through that stage as well. But really understanding, and we've talked about it already, the conditioning, the patterning, the trauma, the societal expectations, and the kind of pressure or narrative that builds up in us was absolutely critical to me. And so the first part of the book is about taking women on a journey of exploration, of self-reflection, of, well, okay, well, that's interesting. What does trigger that in me? Why do I do that? Why is this important to me? And why isn't this? It's not a right or wrong. It's just a really deep curiosity about who we are and why we do what we do. So that's kind of to me, that's the beginning of the journey, is to really get curious about ourselves and where we come from and why we operate and who we are. The caring for yourself, and arguably they kind of need to layer on top of each other, because the self-compassion piece, which is the caring for yourself, I think for me, I had to learn some self-compassion before I could deepen the knowing yourself. because there was only so far I could go in knowing myself without self-compassion, or it starts to feel a bit like self-abuse, and just giving myself a really hard time or someone else a really hard time. And so the self-compassion in the caring for yourself, self-compassion, the learning of boundaries. I had no boundaries, and I didn't know that. I had no internal boundaries in terms of understanding what was okay and what wasn't okay for me. I crossed other people's boundaries. I allowed other people to cross my boundaries. I had no connection to my anger, which kind of helps me hold boundaries. So that was a whole exploration in learning how to care for myself, including, mentally, physically, emotionally, and financially, as I talk about in there as well. And so, again, I talk about in the book a stage where I was just so burnt out. And by this stage, I'd actually started my own business, but I started my own business with the same energy that I brought to my corporate career, which was from a place of a lot of fear, financial fear predominantly at that time. And, I had this idea that I was going to have this lovely life, kind of balance, run my own business, have a balanced life. And I think I worked harder in those first couple of years
Yes.
than I'd ever worked before in my life. And I get some of that is needed and true, but it's the energy with which we do that I think costs us so much. And, I completely physically burnt myself out with adrenal fatigue, couldn't get up off the couch. My nervous system was so burnt out by that point. And that was the impetus for me to learn that I needed to work out how this care for yourself actually worked, because I had not really been taught it and I did not know how to do it. And now I look back and it seems kind of so obvious and simple. The old analogy in the aeroplane of put your own oxygen mask on before you put it on someone else.
Mask on first.
But hell, I don't know about you, but I was never taught that. I was taught to look after everybody else, and then if there was time at the end, maybe I could find some time for me. But that was never going to happen. So that was kind of the care for yourself. And then, once I had enough understanding of myself and was able to make meaning a little bit of my history and what was going on, once I had enough self-care in place, boundaries in place, then it was a beautiful, and it really was a beautiful journey of self-discovery around, okay, well, what are my core values? What is my purpose? And I don't mean that from a grandiose perspective. I mean that from what is deeply meaningful for me. What fills me up in work and in life? And what is the vision, which I think is where we started? What is the vision I hold for my life for success? And, I wrote so many beautiful vision statements, which I've gone back and looked at. They've all come completely true. So holding strong intentions
Beautiful.
and then aligning and moving towards that is, that's a juicy part of the journey.
It is. And, it's so, I often find it's very underrated, because I think in my experience personally and talking with other people too, holding on to a vision and knowing the direction that you want to take your life in and zooming out and thinking a little bit longer term is really challenging to maintain, because you get so focused in the everyday life and the next steps that we don't often give ourselves that permission to look further out. And I think a real benefit in doing so is, of course, authenticity, in knowing that you're in charge of your life and you can steer it, the direction of your life. But also you are able to approach challenges and approach life with less of the hustle energy.
Yeah.
Because I find not everything is so short term that you're clutching on, like you spoke to the nervous system and being tense. I think when our vision is narrow, that is the risk. But actually zooming out, widening a perspective, it is often an invitation to more ease.
Yeah. Beautifully said.
Even if it could be scary too, of course.
Well, I was going to say, and I think the really interesting thing, so I write this vision, I typically do it every couple of years or just when I'm in transition or something's changing. I'm already due to do another one with the book coming out because I can feel the energy's kind of changing in terms of my career. And I have this kind of commitment of ideally picking that vision up every month or so and just reading it out loud to myself. It just kind of helps me to realign or check in, and is that still the case in terms of what I'm moving towards? Am I making the right steps towards that? But you know what I noticed, and it's so interesting because I noticed it only a couple of days ago and I read it out loud, is the resistance sometimes to picking that up, the resistance sometimes to moving forward, to the spaciousness, to the ease, to the vision I hold. And yeah, I'm quite fascinated by that in me, that, you know, often I used to be running away from something. Now I notice sometimes my fear of moving towards more joy or more ease, because again, my nervous system's pretty used to a bit of chaos. And so, yeah, I'm very curious about that.
Such a good point. And our lives are a reflection of what our nervous system is able to handle.
Yeah.
Because we are never able to move further than when we experience a shutdown. And when we are so dysregulated, we go into our fight, our flight, our freeze mode. None of this is going to happen because it's like pulling the big handbrake up on your life.
Yeah.
And of course, that is linked to your story. So I think it's like taking it step by step.
Yeah.
So as to not overwhelm yourself.
Exactly. And really counterintuitively slowing it all down.
Yeah. Which actually can be quite frightening for people at the start. So be aware of that. I think anyone who is opening up onto this sort of healing journey or starting to ask those deeper questions about some, or questioning even the behaviors that you're exhibiting, the actions that you're taking in your life, at first you're probably going to be very confronted. Remember the first time I sat down to meditate, I was fidgety as hell. It was like, what is this? So deeply uncomfortable, quickly saying, I absolutely cannot do this. What is this?
Yeah.
No, I think the first time I sat down in a chair for 5 minutes and was like, what do I do? I don't know. And I realized at that point, that is a sign of the hyper dysregulation and of avoiding yourself. In fact,
totally. Yeah, it's such a
some
learning stillness. Yeah, getting used to. I think I always thought that the uncomfortable were the big feelings or the difficult feelings, but I think in the end for me, and you know, they can be the anxieties, the grief, but actually the uncomfortable feelings when your nervous system is used to being wired all the time is the simplicity of life, the stillness in life.
Absolutely. You know, something that you said in your book, which I also very much appreciate. So you speak about self-care. And when we speak about self-care, we often assume that that's going to mean you put some lavender oil in a bubble bath and you take yourself on a hike once in a while. And those things, sure, they can be lovely. But I also love and appreciate that you said, you know what? Sometimes self-care is also sitting down and doing your taxes and your life admin and making sure you've got your T's crossed and your I's dotted.
Yeah.
Such a good perspective.
Yeah. Well, for me, those were the things that I often avoided because they felt either tedious or they brought up stuff, emotions, fears. But they're core to our self-care, yeah? Having your insurances in place, your income protection insurance, or getting your wills in place, or all these things that I really think of self-care, and I don't mean this in a not yet another task on my to-do list kind of way, but it's our responsibility to ourselves. It's that adult part of us that says, okay, there are things in my life that I need to do that are really important for my well-being holistically. And yeah, some of those might be going off for a hike occasionally or putting some lavender in the bath, because that kind of helps me feel. But actually, a lot of the time, it might be getting up and doing some movement that I don't feel like doing, but I know that that is what my nervous system and I need, because I've got a day of sitting in front of, people all day. And so, it's a very adult thing, I think, to know what is good for us and then actually give ourselves what is good for us.
Yeah, absolutely. And it takes some reflection.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
It's a
some
journey. Like
intentionally
all of
carving
it,
out
it's
some
a
time.
journey.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
And we do it
Oh,
well
yeah.
some weeks and we do it
The
really badly other weeks.
Exactly. Self-compassion girl.
Yeah.
But there is really the magic. Magic is found in what we are avoiding, and turning away from the avoidance to approaching what it is that is making us uncomfortable. That is where life changes hugely.
Yeah. Yeah. And
Is there anything you...
and for me, I can only do that with self-compassion.
Yeah. Yeah. It is literally the antidote to fear. Like, it is I think the only way of moving through fear healthily.
Yes.
Because a lot of the time it will be, people will say, go for it. I met a really inspiring entrepreneur the other week, who was a brilliant speaker, serial entrepreneur, bought and sold so many companies. And he gave a speech. And one of the things that he spoke about was the nature of fear. Loved it. But he said, what do I do? Sure, when you're an entrepreneur, fear will come up. Of course it will. What have I found that works? To just go, push. And I paused and reflected on that, and I thought, okay, sometimes I can see that helps to not sink, to not drown, to not be totally consumed and want to crumble and withdraw. Mm. And then at the same time, I thought to myself, somewhat judgmentally, your health looks like it's not the best. You're very red. Like, I don't think I've ever seen someone so red, overweight, brilliant at work, absolutely brilliant, but it was so clear that his health was not there. And there was a part where I thought, oof, the coach in me thinking, okay, maybe some self-compassion. Yeah. I would like to unpack that. Let's see if we can, go a little bit more gently sometimes, and if that's possible.
And that's that real masculine way, yeah? Push through, front up, suck it up, keep going. And as you said, of course, some days we do have to show up when it's incredibly difficult to. And I certainly know that for me over the last couple of months, there's been times when I haven't wanted to show up, but I have because I've needed to. But there's also been days when I've crawled into bed for the day and given myself some space to fall apart, because that's what I needed. I needed some space to feel some feelings and process what's going on for me. And so, yeah, we've got to find this balance, or we destroy ourselves. And I kind of hear physically that is what may be going on for that person.
Yes, and you're absolutely right. I think there will be areas of our life where it shows, whether that be in our relationships, our relationship with our children, with our partners, or not partners, in our work, in our health.
Yeah.
But yeah.
And I think when you asked earlier, what is life success for me, it really is looking at all those elements that are important to me, and everybody has elements that are more important or less important to them. So I get it. So really individual thing to become aware of what's really important to you. But I truly, deeply believe, and boy, I've seen it in the thousands of people that I've worked with. Many people have a great deal of success in their work life and have very unhappy either relationships or children relationships or health. And for me, that is not success. Yeah. And again, a bit like you, sounds a bit judgy, but there's a wonderful book. I don't know if you've seen it, The Five Regrets of the Dying, by Bronnie Ware.
We've spoken about it on the podcast quite a few times.
And I kind of love it.
Yeah.
Her number one is, I wish I had lived more true to myself, which is kind of at the core of what my book is and what this conversation is. But the second one is, I think it's the second one, I wish I hadn't worked so hard. And, oh, God, I see so many people that I know one day will wake up and go, what was that all for? What was that all about? Now, I was lucky that happened for me at a really young age. It got very messy in between. But, I think it's important for us to find space to stop and reflect on what is it all about? What when I'm in my rocking chair and I look back and I'm sitting there thinking about my life, what do I want to be proud of? What do I want to be happy with?
Yeah, absolutely. Jo, is there anything that you're currently avoiding, given that we're speaking about avoidance and bringing this down to the real honest part?
What a great question. Don't I hate that question?
Just a confronting one.
Yeah, just a little one. I'm not actually sure what it is. I can't name it, but I can feel it. And it does have to do around the book launch and all the social media and the PR and everything that I'm doing around it. I wouldn't say I'm avoiding it. I feel like I'm actually really showing up. But there is something that wants to run and hide. And so I'm curious about that part in me that wants to run and hide. I get she needs some space to do a little bit of that, but she also needs to I need to come back and continue and find the consistency in it all. And so I think what that means, if I'm kind of dissecting it while I'm on the call with you, is I think I'm avoiding there's another part of me that's avoiding some ease, some grace, some success in inverted commas. That I'm not quite comfortable with it yet. I'm not quite sure what's happening yet. Yeah, still unfolding. What about you?
Thank you for the honesty. What about me? Something similar to you. I'm avoiding full commitment on a project because it feels more comfortable.
Yeah.
I think when you show up with full commitment, not I want this to happen, I'd like this to happen, this could be nice, this could be great, but I will make this happen in my life. Your level of resolution completely shifts. And by doing so, you have to close doors to other things. You have to say no to other things. You have to go all in. And I think there's been ways that I'm avoiding that because of the fear of doing so. Even though I know that actually that will lead to the best result.
Yeah. It sounds like you and I are in similar places with that.
Don't know anyone listening is resonating with that as well, where you're a bit in between in some aspects of your life. And I find that the part of the antidote, or what helps, is sharing with other people, finding accountability partners, realizing you don't have to do everything alone.
Totally.
The support is there, and it's not to be ashamed of to ask for support. You don't need to, because I think so many of us also, we present a facade of everything is okay, sure, everything's going fine, and it's actually not. Yeah. And there's only a few select people that you dare to tell the real truth to.
Yes.
But actually, if we could, I think, dare, and this leads back to what we're talking about with authenticity, I think if we can dare to show to more people what it is we're actually struggling with, we will have more support than we realize, and we'll have the resources necessary to surmount that challenge.
Yeah.
I'm going to move into the final fast few questions now, Jo. And the first thing I wanted to ask you is there something that you used to believe that you no longer believe?
Yeah, and it just came up when you were talking then. I used to believe that I had to do it all alone. I really fundamentally believed that I was on my own. And I know where that comes from in my childhood. And I wish I could say I don't believe it at all anymore. I get it's still something that can run me. But exactly what you just talked about in terms of that antidote, that I don't have to do it alone. There is an enormous amount of support out there for me, and I've experienced that a lot in recent weeks and months. I feel like it's fundamentally changing, and I love that because that's a whole new way of doing life.
Yes. Second, what is a piece of advice that you would give to your younger self? Maybe your 20, 30-year-old self.
It's going to be okay. I wish I had known that. It's going to be okay. It's going to be more than okay, actually. Yeah, I would reassure her that we're on a journey, that we're not meant to be perfect and get it all right, and that everything is kind of happening at the right time for the right reason.
What trust? What trust? No, it's calming for the nervous system.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's what I needed.
And lastly, what is yeah, absolutely. I think so many of us do. So many of us do. I think I need to start going into more companies and talking about nervous system regulation, freaking everyone out.
Totally.
And lastly, what is a closing message that you'd like to give our listeners who are on this healing, self-discovery, self-development journey?
We've talked about it a lot, which is the self-compassion. If on this healing journey that has not been something that you have explored fully, and I had a lot of cynicism around it, around really the value of it. It felt very soft. And, you know, particularly in the early stages of my recovery where I just kind of felt like I had to push through a little bit like that guy you were talking about, push through. It was the number one game changer for me when I began, and it is an ongoing journey, when I began to really treat myself as I would my own best friend.
Have your own back. So important. Jo, thank you so much for sharing some of your story with us today and your wisdom too, the lessons that you've learned. I think it's such an important point to dare to live an authentic life. You know, you raised that point there from Bronnie Ware about not working so hard, or about not about being brave enough to live a life that's true to yourself. And I think your story really encapsulates that, and it shows it's possible. You show that there's a successful transition can be made from one area to another, and that is probably inspiring for a lot of people who are feeling dissatisfied in some areas of their life and know they need to make a change but aren't so sure how to go about it. It's not to say it's going to be easy, but Jo's here to show you that it is possible. And it's all gonna be okay.
All gonna be okay. Yeah. Thank you for having me, Shannon. It's been a really rewarding conversation.
My pleasure.